Hello, this is Allie with the Perception Trainers, and today we have episode 6 of Real Talk for Lightworkers. So in today's episode, I want to explore this idea, this phenomenon, that when you are walking down your spiritual path, okay, you feel like you're getting crazier, more confused, less stable, less aware, more discombobulated than you ever have been in your life, okay? So this video is for you if you're feeling like the farther down this path you go, the less clear you become, the less grounded you become. And maybe you're even getting to this point where you feel like, holy crap, like, am I crazy? Is all this stuff just wrong? Like, what's going on? I have so many conflicting ideas. I have so many conflicting feelings. There's so much conflicting information, and I'm just feeling overwhelmed and like I might be crazy. Okay, so there are kind of two reasons why this happens to us as light workers on this path of awakening, because that's really what you are, right? First and foremost, fundamentally speaking, the path of the light worker is simply the path of someone who's chosen to awaken in this lifetime, right? It's not even so much what you're here to do on the planet, right? As in like what your outward stuff is and what your outward offerings are to humanity. Because remembering that ultimately your greatest offering is your own vibration, right? Where you are inside of yourself is the highest work that you do here on the planet, right? The highest degree of service to humanity is you doing your own awakening, right? So even if you're someone who does not consider yourself to be like an overt light worker, if you're doing self-exploration, if you're doing self-actualization, if you're doing any of this kind of work, you are serving the planet. You are a light worker. And so that is the first thing, right? Is to remember that truly, 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 it's not so much about what you are doing, okay? And also to understand that what you are doing is coming from this internal awakening that you're going through. And it's coming from the expression of your divine, whole, true nature, right? So that's what being a light worker is, and I know we've kind of talked about that, but anyways, so that being that, when you're on a path of awakening, you are a light worker. They're one and the same thing. So the first thing that can cause this feeling of like, I'm just getting more confused, I'm getting more crazy, I'm getting less grounded, and maybe even my life is getting crazier, not more settled as I do this awakening work, that is because in the beginning, especially, and like the beginning can be the first 6 months or the first 10 years. The beginning is kind of like, you know, whatever it is for you. In the beginning, you are being confronted with ultimate higher truths that contradict what you have been raised to believe in society. Okay? You are being confronted with frequencies that are much different than the average frequency of the aggregate. You are being confronted with information that directly conflicts with what you have been programmed to believe about yourself and the world, okay? So when you are feeling overwhelmed and confused in the beginning, understand that usually it's because, again, right, you are being asked to change what you believe foundationally. You are being asked to change how you see yourself and how you see the world foundationally. And on top of that, you're being asked to make these changes in a vacuum, right? There aren't going to be a lot of people around you that agree with this new take on life that you have, this new take on yourself that you have, right? And we've talked about this in the last video about why being a light worker is such hard work. It's because you are literally being called along a path that is contrary to what everyone else is doing. And so it's going to lead to confusion. It's going to lead to disharmonic frequencies, right? Because remembering that if you were to stay completely asleep, okay, and really all that means is like if you were to stay completely in the mindset of the average individual out there, okay, your life would of course be messy, because like most people's lives are messy, right? Like your life would have trouble and problems, and you would struggle with money, you would struggle with relationships, and you would have no idea why this is happening, right? And you'd be going about trying to fix the external world like everyone else is doing, or hating yourself like everyone else is doing. But there would be like a consistency to it, Okay, so like that's the thing that I want you to understand, is that the reason you look out and sometimes you think like, holy crap, like it seems like people who are not doing this spiritual awakening work, yeah, their lives are kind of messed up and weird, but it almost seems like they're more stable than I am as someone who's awakening. And like, right, like the more information I get, it feels like I'm actually crazier than the average person. Like it doesn't really seem like this is serving to make me a more stable, grounded, with a right perspective person. It seems like it's making me crazier than the average person. And I would say, of course, right? Because the average person, like I say, whatever mess they're in, they are staying on a consistent frequency. Okay? So like the statistic that they showed, that there's the majority of women who are raised by alcoholic men will marry an alcoholic, right? They are doing that because they know how to live that life, right? That is a consistent frequency. They know how to be that person. They know how to respond to a drunk individual. They know, right? It may be chaotic and crazy and cause damage, but to a degree, they are able to keep that damage sort of under control, right? Because they know how to handle that situation. And so this is what you need to understand, is that most people are staying on a consistent frequency. They're staying on a consistent belief system. They're staying with a consistent perspective. So because of that, whatever chaos exists, it's like a controlled chaos, right? It's like a predictable chaos. They're going to probably face the same problems over and over and over again, right? Like your friends that you talk to that are literally tell you the same problem every single time you talk to them. And you kind of get to a point where you're like, are you serious? Like you're going to do this again? But it's like, of course they are, because that's their consistent frequency. That's their consistent problem. And so that is why when you as a light worker are shifting from your perspective that you had to a new perspective, when you're shifting from the frequency that you had to a new frequency, it's going to cause a disruption, right? Anytime you go from here to here, right, there's going to be a kind of like explosion, right? You're going to get rid of things are going to fall away, things are going to fall apart. Things that you held on to as being your truths and your identities and all these things fall away, and before the new thing comes in, you're going to feel empty and like lost and confused and discombobulated. You're going to go back and forth between the old way of thinking, the new way of thinking, the old way of thinking, the new way of thinking, right? And so this is going to cause a whole bunch of vibrational disharmony. And this is what you need to understand, is that of course you're going to feel more confused, you're going to feel more lost, you're going to feel more triggered, you're going to feel more out of control than ever, because you're shifting, you're making changes, and shifting and changing is not an easy process. You're growing. It's kind of like, when teenagers are growing and they have growing pains, and there's like those the very awkward teenage years where like your body is like too big for you, and like you haven't grown into your ears and your nose yet and all this stuff, right? It's very awkward. You kind of have like more of an adult body, but you still have kind of childlike consciousness and like all of this weird stuff. That's the transition period, right? And that's what it's like at the beginning of this awakening process that you're going on. And like I said, that beginning can be 6 months or it can be 10 years. There's no kind of like what the beginning is. But just to understand, right, that you're shifting and you're changing and you're being confronted with contradictory information. Everyone else is essentially living in a more or less consistent reality, right? That it's like what they believe about themselves is being reflected back to them, and it's a very predictable situation. And that's easy to look at when you see someone out there, right? It's once you kind of start to awaken to this information, you're like, well, of course, it's very self-consistent. They're doing the same things over and over again that, align with what they believe, that align with what the kind of aggregate believes. And so, like I say, there's chaos, but it's a consistent chaos. What you're doing by shifting what you believe and shifting how you see things and shifting your perspective and allowing old programming to go away and new programming to be installed in your being, you are going to cause disruption and disharmony to your consistency. And so it's going to make you feel crazier, okay? And so just understand that. And my little key for this is that this is why along your light working path, you're going to go through periods of exhaustion. You're going to go through periods where you don't want to do anything. You're going to go through periods where you're just completely incapacitated in regular life. And again, that's the wisdom of your body and your spirit telling you you need to slow down so that you can integrate this stuff. Because if you're still trying to go full speed ahead on your life while essentially, right, like making quantum leaps in your perspective and quantum leaps in your energy and quantum leaps in your way of being here on the planet, you're going to burn out, right? We talked about this in the last video, or a few videos ago about like burning out, that you're, again, shifting paradigms, you're shifting timelines, you're doing all of this crazy stuff, and it requires a high amount of energy to do this. So you're probably going to be exhausted and feel crazy. So what I'm going to say is this: if you're feeling exhausted and crazy, slow down. Get rid of things in your life that you don't have to have. Stop beating yourself up when you let the ball drop sometimes, or a lot of the time, because you're integrating and you need to slow down, and it's not going to be like this forever. And truly, the more you allow yourself to kind of let the world fall apart around you a little bit as you're changing what's going on inside of your own being, the quicker you'll get through the beginning phase of this journey. Okay? It's by continuing to try to keep your life the way that's always been as you're going through this transition that actually prolongs the beginning period, right? Because you're bouncing back between frequencies, you're bouncing back between realities. And like I say, in the beginning, it's more of a stripping away than anything. You're going to lose a lot of stuff. You're going to go through a period where your life just becomes more and more and more empty, and you have nothing enough to replace it with because you're ripping out the foundations. You're changing frequencies, you're changing the way that you see things, and you're ripping out foundations, and that's the first thing that has to happen. So when you get exhausted, and when you get overwhelmed, and when life is like just too hard for you, and it seems like everyone else can get on with things and you can't, that's okay. Because yeah, they are consistent. They are staying where they are, and they are consistently doing what they're doing. You're transitioning, you're transmuting, you're transforming. That's a lot of work, and it requires a lot of rest, okay? Second thing, as a light worker who lives in the 21st century, there is an abundance of access to information, especially spiritual information. You can literally go on YouTube and listen all day long, every day for the rest of your life to spiritual teachings. And this is an awesome thing, of course, to be exposed to this stuff. I think there's absolute benefit in it. Obviously, I'm doing it, right? But on the other side, we need to remember that in all the other ancient cultures, this spiritual knowledge and spiritual wisdom was reserved for mystery schools. It was not common knowledge. These things were not readily available to the average population, and there was a reason for that. Okay? And this is the other thing that I really want you to ground into your being and accept as being the truth. Okay? So the metaphor that I'm going to give for this is this. If you're on your way, right? If two people are going from New York to LA, okay? So two people are driving their car from New York to LA. So now, right? Two people are doing this. One person leaves a little bit earlier than the other one, or one person's driving faster than the other one's. And there's someone who's saying, okay, I'm going to give them directions from New York to LA, right? One person's in Boston, one person's in Arizona. The directions that you give to the person in Boston do not apply to the person in Arizona. The directions that you give to the person in Arizona do not apply to the person in Boston, all right? It is individual for each person where you are on your path, what spiritual knowledge actually applies to you right now, and what stuff is completely, has nothing to do with you, okay? Right, if the person in Boston tries to use the directions that I'm giving the person in Arizona, they're going to get lost because those directions don't apply to where they are, right? If I try and give the person the Boston directions and the Arizona directions, that Arizona direction is way too much information, right? It's information they don't need to know right now. It doesn't apply to them, and it can actually confuse them for the information they need to get from Boston to Arizona, right? Same thing, the person in Arizona listening to the advice from the direction for the person in Boston doesn't apply, right? So we need to understand that there's a range of truth, okay? and that not all truths apply to us in this moment. So just because we have access to all of these teachings doesn't mean that all of these teachings are appropriate for us in this moment. Okay? Yogi Bhajan says this: give the right man the right advice. Don't give the wrong man the right advice. Don't give the right man the wrong advice. Give the right man the right advice. And this is foundational. You have to use your internal guidance system when listening to someone give you spiritual advice. Okay? Not necessarily to understand that, the spiritual advice or the self-actualization advice, the whatever advice is not true. Okay? It just may not be relevant to where you are on your journey right now. So for instance, if you hear a teaching on forgiveness, and then you're like, okay, this person is telling me that forgiveness is the biggest key and I have to just forgive everyone that's, ever hurt me. And you go to try and apply that practice and you are just rife with turmoil. And it makes you feel horrible about yourself because you can't get yourself to that state. You can't forgive. You still feel angry. You still feel hurt. You still feel wounded. You still want to seek revenge. Any of these things. It's not because you're broken and you can't apply that truth. Okay? It's because you're at a stage on your journey where you first need to love the one that's hurting. It's not about forgiveness right now, right? The forgiveness principle doesn't apply to you right now. And that's not because you're wrong. It's not because the teaching is wrong. It's not because you're bad. It's not because you're blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. You need to accept and admit where you are in this moment. So if a teaching makes you feel terrible about yourself, it's not the teaching for you. And then the second thing that I would say is that also because of the world that we live in, right? Many people are getting their kind of self-image as a spiritual teacher without having truly deeply applied the practices that they're teaching, which means that there are a lot of teachings out there that are actually just fundamentally untrue. They actually don't work. They're really not true in a universal sense. And the reason that we get all confused about it is because we think logically these things sound right, and then we start to pass it on without ever actually having practiced things. So for instance, like The Secret. The way that the law of attraction is taught in The Secret is foundationally untrue. That's not how it works. It's not about how you can rearrange your life to get what you want. That's not the point of the law of attraction, okay? But because those people who wrote that book or whatever didn't actually really practice it and apply it in their lives first and see what the whole range of results were before they taught it, right? And then they taught it to a whole bunch of other people who aren't using their discernment, barometer for what is real and what is not. These teachings get passed on, and then we think, oh man, I'm just totally fucking it up because I can't do it the way that they're saying. Where's my $1 million? There must be something wrong with me. And it's like, no, it's just because that truth isn't a truth. Okay? So, remembering, you are where you're at on your journey, and if a teaching makes you feel terrible about yourself, it's either fundamentally untrue or it's just not what you need in this moment. Okay? If it's very, very, very difficult for you to apply a teaching, it's not the teaching for you right now. The teachings that are right for you right now are the ones that are just a step above where you are. That should feel like, okay, it's a little bit of a challenge, it's a little bit just uncomfortable, it's a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I can do it, right? I can apply this, I can practice this, and I can start to see some results, right? So if that's not what's happening, then that's not the teaching for you, or it's just a completely false teaching, okay? So you are shifting, and so you're adjusting your frequencies, and that's going to create an inconsistent reality, which is going to make you feel crazy. So there's nothing wrong with you. That's what happens. Rest, integrate, rest, integrate, rest, integrate. It won't last forever, but if you let yourself rest, it will go faster. Second thing, we have access to all of these teachings. Not all of them apply to you, and not all of them are true. So you need to, don't binge watch stuff. Really, absorb a teaching, see if you can apply it, and really feel if it feels true or not, right? Binge watching stuff gets you overwhelmed, okay? So especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, stop watching all the stuff. Start to just implement some of the things that you have heard and see if it's true or not, okay? So subscribe, share, follow, do all that fun stuff. All my links to social media are down below. Join the Patreon group, it's really, really fun. And leave me comments, questions, concerns, all that great stuff. And other than that, I will see you in the next video.